Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Embiggen Consulting segment at the Philippine Startup Week. My name is Samantha Guevara, a Research and Development Associate for Embiggen, and I will be your host for this evening. Tonight, we will have a lot of exciting discussions directly from the leadership team. Headquartered in Manila and San Francisco, Embiggen is an international innovation strategy and consulting firm committed to empower forward-thinking organizations to navigate disruptive change and own their future. Challenged by the pandemic, corporate innovation is needed now more than ever to set firms apart from other industry players and ultimately solidifying their presence in the market. At Embiggen Consulting, we partner with firms to design and execute strategic innovation systems to bring your organization long-term resilience and meaningful growth to navigate the next normal. By leveraging our Silicon Valley blueprints, we aim to build organizational resilience and develop a culture of corporate entrepreneurship. To start off our session, our first speaker is an enterprise innovation leader. He's the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for one of the oldest and biggest Philippine universities, leading the establishment of the first academe-based venture builder in the country. He serves as an advisor and consultant for several organizations and technology startups, where he helps their leaders create and implement innovation and business strategies. To talk more about Embiggen Consulting and the different models of corporate innovation, let me introduce our founding CEO and managing partner, Roland Marco Garcia.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Roland Marco Garcia. I'm the founding CEO and managing partner of Embiggen Consulting. Thank you, Sam, for that very generous introduction. So in about 15 minutes, we're going to talk about why corporate innovation is very important and what are the different types of innovation and what can your organization do to be able to innovate internally and what model is best employed for your current resources and for your strategic goals in the near future, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. It is known that 61% of CEOs expect a startup competitor to disrupt their industry at any moment. We saw this, next slide. We saw this in Kodak. We saw this in taxis, for example. We saw this in live streaming, for example, and entertainment. These are incumbents that were disrupted by Silicon Valley startups or newcomers, precisely because the incumbent company, like Kodak, for example, or the taxi industry, failed to innovate and failed to be obsessed with the customers and the new consumer behavior that are usually followed on with respect to the times. Like, for example, it is now the new digital age, and there are a lot of companies that are struggling in how to digitally transform their companies, how to innovate from within. Next slide. So this is something that a lot of companies have known, but they don't take it seriously. So I think that if corporations don't disrupt themselves, a startup will. Right? Next slide. So every organization, especially during the age of innovation, different crises left and right, every organization needs the ability to be able to firstly experiment rapidly with new products and new business models to create new growth, to be able to create new lines of revenue for their company. Number two is to be able to empower their most creative people, which are the corporate entrepreneurs, right? Because no matter how much strategy, no matter how much foresight you're able to do, if there's no one in your company that is able to actually implement these strategies, these goals, right, it's not going to work. So there's a new trend right now of more and more bigger companies, Fortune 500 companies, employing what we call entrepreneurs in residence. Or in this particular case, these are entrepreneurs in residence and intrapreneurs, right? These are entrepreneurs who are experienced, who have perhaps exited their previous company, or who are professionally trained in innovation. And what these companies do is that they employ these people who are entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial at best within the organization. And these are the people who will implement new lines of revenue, new growth, right? And there's even a recent Harvard article saying that in the C-suite, there has to be an entrepreneurial CEO. In this particular case, a very good example is the Globe CEO, Ernest Koo, which is, actually the example in that HBR article. Because an entrepreneurial CEO is able to create new lines of revenue with calculated risk, right? And is able to create new products or services, right? And the rules for entrepreneurs is very different from the rules when you employ a regular employee, right? This is the reason why more and more companies are trying to figure out, how do I change my processes, HR systems to be able to accommodate an entrepreneurial person and to be able to create a culture of digital transformation and innovation, right? And the third thing that companies need to be able to do is to have a formal process of innovation in order to be able to unlock, for example, new sources of growth and productivity. Next slide. Especially today, that the COVID-19 crisis presents an opportunity that actually few feel, equipped to pursue. 90%, for example, of CEOs and executives believe that the COVID-19 crisis will fundamentally change the way we do business over the next 5 years. 85% think that, they're really concerned that the COVID-19 crisis will have a lasting impact on their customers' needs and wants over the next 5 years. For example, a new consumer behavior that we've seen, number one, of course, is the work from home economy. The second is more and more people are resorting to community commerce or community commerce models, as we've seen, right? These are just a few consumer behaviors that are emerging because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the challenge for corporations is to, number one, find out what these new customer behaviors are that are perhaps galvanized because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And second is to be able to create and identify opportunities and exploit those opportunities, right, to be able to create new growth for their company. And this is, next slide. Nearly three out of four executives agree that the changes brought by the COVID-19 pandemic will be a big opportunity for growth. A lot of companies, a lot of CEOs and leaders are afraid because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But there are a few, right, that are in fact really excited because they feel that this is a new opportunity. In fact, we can even argue, right, that the new billion-dollar companies will come out from the pandemic. New Fortune 500 companies will be on the list because of the pandemic, right? Because these are the companies in leadership, right, that are able to identify these opportunities and exploit these opportunities. And it's only through innovation that we're able to do that. Next slide. And this is the reason why we think leadership, corporations, and even new startups, right, need to prioritize innovation today because this is the key to unlock post-crisis growth. Now that, for example, Pfizer has already announced that it has, a vaccine for COVID-19, today is the day, actually yesterday was the day to be able to implement strategic innovation systems in your company, right, to exploit the new consumer behavior brought about the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. And these are just 7 strategies to be able to employ corporate innovation. The first one is, of course, perhaps the oldest strategy in the book, which is setting up internal R&D and product innovation labs. But this is not to confuse innovation and research and development, right? R&D is just, trying to create a new prototype, right? But innovation is to create and find new business models, to find the customer persona that fit that business model, and to be able to find new value propositions from the market, right? R&D doesn't do that, right? Secondly, there's also a rise, especially in Silicon Valley, the model of corporate accelerators, right? What they do is that they incubate and accelerate a new idea from within the company, right? Thirdly, which is perhaps a very important thing, especially for startups watching here, are startup and corporate partnerships. And this may be in the form of mergers and acquisitions, which are the fourth. Mergers and acquisitions, right? And corporate venture capital investments. These are bigger companies acquiring a smaller company. In the Philippines, we've had Galleon, for example, acquired by the Sterling Group, right? CVCs, like for example, Globe's venture capital arm is Kickstart, and for Smart, for example, they have what they call Voyager Innovations, right? And Idea Space, right? And even QBO and Idea Space sprung out from this specific idea of CVCs, right? The sixth and the most, perhaps the newest addition, which is corporate venture building. Corporate venture building is leveraging on the internal resources of a company and being able to create new lines of revenue, new startups, new companies, right, from within the company, right? So this is not an open innovation system. This is a closed innovation system, right? Vis-a-vis, for example, a corporate venture capital investment, which is getting startups and partnerships from outside the company. But venture building is leveraging on the internal resources and creating a startup or startups from within the corporation, right? And a lot of companies don't know what is the venture building model. In fact, if you're interested in this, we can actually help you build a venture builder within your company. A good example of a venture builder is the 917 Ventures of Globe. Right? This is where new startups, companies are built, using the resources of Globe and the Ayala Group. And the seventh, which is I think the most understated and something that will be talked about by the second speaker, Professor Jose, is corporate foresighting. Corporate foresighting is the formal process of trying to create scenarios for the future, trying to see signals from the future, and exploiting that to create new lines of revenue and new ideas. Right? So these are just some of the corporate innovation strategies that can be employed by the organization, right? Or if you're already an existing startup, in this particular case, Airbnb has an internal venture builder called Samara, right? And this is precisely was born because of the trips product of Airbnb, right? And this is a different conversation altogether, right? Next slide. And these corporate innovation strategies have three types of innovation that they do, right? So this what the first one is what we call transformative innovation. These are new business models, new value propositions, and entirely new growth engines. And this might be the most risky type of innovation that you can employ within your organization. And this might also be the most expensive one. Right? The second one is sustaining innovation. Right? Sustaining innovation is a replacement, or to extend a current value proposition, a new channel, a new geography. So a business model that's already working and you want to perhaps increase the capability of that new business model. It might be employing the same business model to another geography, the same business model, for example, to a different customer segment. That's sustaining innovation. And the third one is efficiency innovation. These are improving the processes internally, may be operations, may be HR, may be, for example, logistics, right? These are the types of innovation that perhaps you might employ using the 7 different corporate innovation strategies. Next slide. And this is why we've built Embiggen Consulting, which is corporate innovation in emerging economies using blueprints from Silicon Valley. What we've seen that's lacking in emerging markets like Manila is that they employ the first world countries' innovation strategies, right? But it is not hyper localized to a specific country. Their companies, for example, in the Philippines have very different needs from companies in, for example, the US, right? Because, for example, digital transformation strategies is alien, for example, to even government offices in the Philippines, medium enterprise in the Philippines. Next slide. And we wanted to empower the ASEAN region and different parts of the world that are just emerging to be able to create new growth using blueprints from Silicon Valley and to create corporate innovation strategies and processes from within their corporations. And our company is powered by knowledge and expertise to help you navigate the next normal. As we've seen, there is a formal innovation process that can be employed, a formal blueprint to be able to explore different models of markets, different market segments, different innovation strategies, different ideation strategies, right? And we leverage this using our Silicon Valley blueprints to be able to future proof your organization. Next slide. What we also want to do is to build organizational resilience through innovation and digital transformation. And as I've mentioned earlier, the main engine of digital transformation and innovation is developing a culture of corporate entrepreneurship. We want to be able to create and transform your culture into something that can actually accommodate innovation, something that can actually accommodate new businesses and new growth for your organization. Next slide. We do this in four ways. The first one, and there are services that perhaps can help you, is corporate innovation strategies. In here, what we do is we set up corporate venture building capacities. You can act as your venture capital arm. We also train your employees to become corporate entrepreneurs, and we connect you to different experts in Silicon Valley. The second one, which will be discussed by Professor Jose, is futures thinking strategic foresight, and perhaps I'll leave that to him to explain that, right? The third one are digital transformation solutions. In here, we partner with startups, established startups, for example, from Silicon Valley, and we use their tools and solutions to be able to help your company digitally transform. And the fourth one is, of course, as we've mentioned, digital transformation and innovation will not work without the upskilling of your employees. This is the reason why we've partnered up with AIM, School of Executive Education and Lifelong Learning, to create a program, and we've created a program to train the next digital leaders and innovation leaders for the Philippines. Okay. Next slide. Embiggen Consulting was founded by a group of tech entrepreneurs, innovation strategists, experienced innovation consultants, two of which actually are from here and will be moderating this panel. Is one of the people who actually established QBO in Idea Space, Earl Valencia and Paul Pajo. And these are all innovation ecosystem actors in the Philippines and in Silicon Valley, right? Next slide. What we've built with AIM is called the Digital Transformation Fellows Executive Program. And the goal here is to accelerate leadership in digital transformation and innovation to build Asia's new digital economy. Next slide. And this is a very, very powerful partnership to bring a pioneering program, the first in the Philippines, where an academe actor, such as AIM, which is the premier management school in the Philippines, and an innovation consulting firm, an international consulting firm, to train the next generation of innovation leaders. Right. Next slide. Later on in the panel, we're going to hear from the managing director of the AIM SEAL department to talk about more about the program, which is a 15-week hyper-accelerated program to train the next generation of leaders in the Philippines and in emerging markets. Next slide. The benefits of this program is you will have exclusive access from Silicon Valley leaders. These are heads of innovation, for example, from Spotify, Netflix, Marriott, the NBA, right? And be with a community of trusted digital transformation and innovation leaders, and you will be exposed to the latest knowledge and thinking, right? And at the end of the program, actually, you will have a specific trip to Silicon Valley to be able to immerse yourself in the most mature digital ecosystem in the world. Next slide. These are some of the logos of the people that you can expect, right? These are from Google, Amazon, Spotify, Netflix, LinkedIn, Harvard Business School, Stanford is even here. And you will learn insights from them, digital transformation and innovation strategies for your startup, for your growing organization, right? And exploit that and bring that back in your organization to be able to create new innovation processes, and you'll be able to learn practical knowledge, reinvent your processes to create networks, and of course being exposed to the latest thinking from these particular innovation experts. Right? Next slide. And in this, for example, for corporate innovation models, what we feel is going to be beneficial for you is to build a long-term digital vision, to create a culture of transformation. What are the mindsets of founders? And these are true both for the services of Embiggen Consulting and what you will learn in the AIM program, right, that we are going to launch. So I really believe that innovation is the relentless pursuit of improvement, and to some extent, a healthy disregard for tradition. So what I do hope for your company is to be able to engage us, to create new lines of revenue for you, create new growth for you, and to be able to establish a culture of corporate entrepreneurship and digital transformation and innovation for your company. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland, for showing us how corporate innovation is not limited to adopting current trends within the market. Moving forward, I believe that our audience will now be able to incorporate business strategies of the past and implement them in the present. For our next speaker, he is currently working on projects exploring the future of artificial intelligence and blockchain in supply chains and the future of Philippine learning and development industry. Apart from this, he is also a professor of futures thinking at the Asian Institute of Management, where he developed and delivered the course for the Master of Innovation in Business program. To talk about how startups and corporations can use futures thinking and strategic foresight in looking at future possibilities to identify opportunities, let me introduce our head and senior consultant, Jose de Colongon.
Thank you very much, Sam, and good evening, everyone, to our audience. It's great to be here. I'm very excited to talk about our topic, which is futuring innovation. And for me, this is something that's very close to my heart. When you think of being an innovator, being someone who wants to start something new, whether as a startup or whether being part of a bigger organization, futures thinking or strategic foresight is really a competency for everyone. Why is it a competency? Because true innovators really have a strong desire to redesign the future. If you look at the likes of many of the world's innovators, from Amazon to Apple to Google to Facebook, by virtue of that product or service that they created, they have impacted the lives of billions of people. They respond to social transformations, searching for opportunities to develop new business models, products, and so on. And the key part here, I would say, whether they say it or not, whether it's something inherent to them or whether it's something that they learned and followed a systematic process, they use futures thinking and strategic foresight as a catalyst for innovation. So what do we mean by futures thinking and strategic foresight? And in some cases, these get interchanged, and that's fine. But if we're going to just differentiate between the two, futures thinking is a way of thinking about new, emergent, and unknown possibilities, while strategic foresight is the application of these concepts and tools in useful ways. Some call it corporate foresight, like what we have here in Embiggen. It's about corporate foresight, meaning applying it in organizations or in a corporate environment. How different is this from strategic planning? It is an input to strategic planning, but it is a separate and distinct process by itself. And in our training, which we provide through Embiggen, we actually go through the details of embracing the different concepts and approaches and origins of this particular, I would say, discipline. Now, foresight is integral to innovation. And why do we say that? Because foresight helps to identify new offerings, as mentioned, to transform the future. It helps to connect emerging technologies and social disruptions that may yield to transformative impact. And later on, I'm going to show examples, real examples of how this was done. It helps to uncover opportunities for innovation, impact, and sustainability. And I'm going to talk about 7 steps later that you can take on how you can use foresight, strategic foresight, for innovation. And innovation here could be in a general sense, I would say talks about building new business models, creating new products and services, or even looking at untapped markets. Uh, and the fourth reason why foresight is important to innovation is it enables innovators to be tuned into forces shaping the future. Now more than ever, with the kind of environment that we have, where there's so much stuff going on. If you look at uh, new technologies that are emerging, every day there's always something new. If you look at our politics, it's like every day there's something weird, something unexpected that's going on. If you look at our society, traditional institutions, strong institutions that we thought of, would never change, are actually changing. And if you look at some of the really established, centuries old industries, they are faced with a level of disruption that is unprecedented, something that even my generation, when I started to work 2 decades ago, we did not face. So what's a perfect example of how strategic foresight was used in a corporate setting, particularly in startups? So what you have here is classic example, Tesla. And they basically used strategic foresight and futures thinking, first of all, to choose, to select the kind of market that they were going into. They knew that they wanted to go into the automotive market, but which segment? And they decided to go into electric vehicles, primarily because they saw that the future of the combustion engine type of vehicles is a used future, meaning it wasn't a sustainable type of business, and they knew that the growth would go into uh, um, vehicles that were run on renewable energy. And Tesla is a perfect example. And they used futures thinking not only in terms of product development, but they used it also to develop their organizational structure and processes. Now, when we talk about futures thinking, that's why it's called futures, is we don't just look at one future. Because in many cases, many of us, traditional strategic planners, traditional people who do forecasts, they just look at the projected future. So if you go from now, and you see that I just doing a straight line, expecting things to be different, like the status quo will not change, then that's a projected future. Before, in environments which were not volatile, which were not uncertain, which were not chaotic, nor ambiguous, it was okay. Like more or less what you thought of what will happen in the future will most probably happen. But in our environment now, you have what we call, there are so many things that can happen. And what we want to explore in futures thinking are these alternative futures, as you can see. We go from possible to plausible to probable to preferable, and even the preposterous futures. Now, what are the 7 steps to futuring innovation? Or how do you make sure that you also embed this? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about changing what we do for the present and making sure that when we design products, when we create business models, it's not just for the present, but also something that will be successful, even become more successful in the future. So we have 7 steps, and you can see here, and we will look at each one. The first step is about defining future scenarios. Now, in the process of helping our clients, we help them, and this is one of our services, where we really look at defining these future scenarios. And as I already mentioned earlier, there's more than just one scenario. And normally with our clients, we come up with 3 or 4 scenarios. What's a good example? One of the companies that really started futures thinking is Shell, the oil company. In the 1970s, we all know the oil crisis hit. And at that time, they said, we will never allow ourselves to be in this position again. And what they did was they created Shell's futures thinking unit. And that is I would say, a formal part of the organization. And up to now, they still have that. And if you can see their website, as you can, I've showed a screenshot here. They've developed different scenarios of what can potentially happen. And you can see in terms of the way they framed it here, they're not just an oil company, they're an energy company, because they know that oil is a used future, and energy as a whole is I would say the bigger context. It's a way for they used it to actually redefine the scope of the industry, of where they were going to look at. So that's one of the things that we help build in our with our clients. Clients, you can do this yourself, but in most cases, it's good to have a third party to actually help you take you through this process, especially if you're doing it for the first time. Now, the second step to futuring innovation is setting the vision. And in most cases, this is really related to the vision and mission of the organization. So that's one of the things that we also do. We help you develop that vision and mission. But you can also have a vision for your transformation efforts. If you talk about digital transformation, what's the end goal? What do you want to achieve? What kind of experience should your users have, whether it's customers or your employees? And other stakeholders. So when we talk about setting the vision, it's also looking at your strategies. What is the strategy that will help you achieve that particular vision? And here's a perfect example of Patagonia. And some of you may know Patagonia as a really iconic and also quite unique apparel company. And here you have the CEO talking about the future. And they said 25 years from now, they don't see a lot of virgin materials in supply chains. And what they see is that we would have to reuse a lot of the existing materials. And we would have to depend on that. And you can see a classic example of them saying, don't buy this jacket, which is funny because they are looking at promoting, reduction, recycling, and so on. So that's an example of setting a future, being clear about what can potentially happen into the future, and using that to inform your innovation strategy. Another perfect example of visioning the future is Dubai in 1991. And in 20 years, they transformed from a desert wasteland to like the center of research and development and commerce in the Middle East. Another example, perfect example, classic example, is the vision of the man in the moon. Trips to the moon have happened before around the moon, like what the Russians did, but no one really ever went to the moon and came back and really landed on the moon. And at the time, Kennedy had that vision. And in less than a decade, he was able to pull it off. And not just him, he galvanized everyone. Industries were created, science and tech evolved, even the people around. The way it created this culture and belief and narratives of American society, that had a profound effect. And for me, innovators, real innovators, are the ones who are able to do that with their products and services. So we go to the third step, which is really identifying opportunities. We have a lot of opportunities. Another way of saying opportunities would be wicked problems or issues or those stuff that need solving and seems to be a headache, whether it's in society or within organization. You know, the recent typhoons, the triple threat typhoons that hit the Philippines, we had a lot of floods in many of the urban centers. And one signal that you could see, there's this floating school in China. And if you can connect the dots, what are opportunities there actually of flooding? Instead of resisting it and seeing it as a negative aspect, why not treat it as an opportunity? And in China, you can see one of the schools has actually embraced that concept. There are a lot more examples. The fourth step is related to determining impact, both positive and negative. So once you've identified the opportunity, what then, if you're able to solve these issues, what's the impact? And you can look at it in terms of financial terms, obviously, but you can, more importantly, you can look at the kind of markets it will impact, the kind of markets it will create, its impact to society. And what are good examples? Here's an example of this is an exhibit done by the California Academy of Sciences during World Oceans Day, and I like it a lot because they were able to show they actually used the dispensers, and people in that convention had to get water from those dispensers, and they put trash inside. Of course, they protected it in such a way that the water was still potable, but you could see that the trash in 2010, that water cooler on the right, is a little bit less compared to 2030. You have so much more trash in 2030. It was a very visual way to actually show the impact of not solving an issue. The same way that you could also identify what's the potential impact of doing something. So it can work both ways. The fifth step is leveraging innovation. Once you've identified this impact, then you can look at different innovations that's happening around the world. So with our clients, we actually help them identify these relevant signals to their business. And so what is a signal? A signal essentially is an example of the future that's happening in the present. And what we do is we show different examples of innovations to our clients, and that becomes sort of an inspiration. And something to just share with our viewers here. There's this website called www.covidinnovations.com. It has more than 1,000 innovations from all over the world, from across industries, that talk about innovations coming from COVID or due to COVID. And here's a couple. So here's an example of an app mainly focused on beer, I would say pub goers. So people who go to bars and so on, to help them keep their social distance. And it's quite interesting. Another example that you could see there is this startup in Japan that's called Donut Robotics, which designs smart masks that connect to phones. And you can actually speak into your mask. So it's like a smart mask, as mentioned. And it helps to send, let's say, text messages. It transcribes your speech. And it can also help to translate Japanese to 8 other languages. So imagine this is an innovation that's already present now. And one of the things that we work with or challenge the people that we help when it comes to strategic foresight is we ask them, okay, what would happen if you take this kind of technology further, right? What can you do to actually take this innovation to the next level in terms of being able to serve more needs, being able to hit a different market, or even growing the market even further and making it more relevant. So those are just a couple of examples. And once you've done that, then you can look at sustainable revenue or determining sustainable revenue coming from these innovations. So here, Daimler, particularly the trucks division, they were looking at the future of mobility. And what did they discover? So they had different scenarios. And what they found out really was the comfort of the driver had a big impact in terms of growing their market. And that's what they did. So they not only made their cars high-tech, but also high-touch in the sense that it enabled a lot of comfort. So when it comes to the actual design of the driver's seat and etc., the different signals, they made the experience so much better for the drivers. So that's an example of impact, and that can be translated to a sustainable source of revenue. And of course, this is something that they could apply not just for the trucks, but there are other types of vehicles as well. Another example is H&M's in-store garment-to-garment recycling system. So they're launching it just in October 12th. This was just several weeks ago, and it's called Loop, L-O-O-P. And you're able to bring your old H&M clothes, and then they recycle it in front of you. And out of it would come textile or even a new garment. So recycling is not new, but they actually took that a step further. And if this becomes successful, I think this is just a pilot, but if this becomes a success, then it becomes another source of revenue for them, which who we don't know could be, a good source of future revenue. And the last step is really out of these, you develop new products, services, and business models. So here, we actually, this is from the Institute for the Future. And what they've done is based on these scenarios, they've actually looked at what are the potential products or services. And here, this is the concept on the autonomous vehicle as a node in the Internet of Things. And it's quite interesting. And it looks at the story of a family trying to build a deck. And here you have the different technologies coming in together, from drones to robotics to artificial intelligence to even out crowdsourcing, where you have the store that offers deliver, swarm, build service packages. And here you get the items delivered to the house using an app. And you have like a lift for builders that actually searches for nearby best qualified workers. So this is fiction. But you can see, just by looking at this, by developing these scenarios, developing these scenes of the future, which we help our clients with, you'd be able to identify new products or services for your particular industry. This is another example with from the Institute of the Future, which is gamifying the whole choosing your food experience, where you have these avatars that appear using virtual lenses, and it's gamified. You get points for eating the good food, and this is enabled through the sensors that's in your tummy. Again, this is a fictional product, but you can look at it if you were a firm or you want to develop a new app. This is something that could be a source of inspiration. So if we actually cut through all of it, this is an example. Again, one of the great things about Embiggen is we contextualize these Western tools into the local context. So here's an example. This was something that I created, and just looking at it in terms of the fishing industry here in the Philippines. As we all know, the fishing industry, it's a key part. We are an archipelagic country. We have more than 7,100 islands. You should actually be one of the world leaders when it comes to fisheries, seafood, and all the supporting industries. But we're not. And we have all of these opportunities on the left, or transformations, as we say, from overfishing to fisher folk and so on. But the key opportunity here is if you could just improve the income of at least double the income of the fisher folk, which is $10 a month income. Just make that $20 and make this income more sustainable. We can make a big difference in the lives of the more than 1,000 families. If you look at the intended impact, if we're able to do this, then we could increase marine life biodiversity, we could improve food security and safety, etc. And what kind of innovations that's existing today could we use? We could look at open sea fish pens, traceability systems. Are there new pricing and value models? Increased investment in cold chains. Again, we're talking about the Philippine context. There's a cooperative in the US that looks at fishing lots and fishing pens. In a way, it sort of works as I would say, a commons system or a cooperative system where people of a particular area, let's say a community, a fishing village, can actually share. There's a mechanism by which they can control and share the kind of harvest that they would get. In terms of sustainable revenue, then you can see here the different sources of revenue. And then out of that is actually a number of potential products or services that could be offered, like community managed and protected fish pens, that's one, a traceability system to tip fisher folk, or even a way that you could actually manage that whole supply chain, training programs and fish preservation techniques, and so on. So this is one very small, simple example. Think more of what we could do for your organization. So I'd like to end with this. So this one was actually shared to me by Roland. Thanks a lot, Roland. And it's an article that links futures thinking with innovation, with strategy. And you can see here, it all starts with developing your vision. And normally, we're used to, okay, develop your vision. But with futures thinking, strategic foresight, you can be actually very clear with the kind of vision that you want to have. Even clear about the kind of vision that you don't want to have. And that actually helps a lot, not just in terms of innovation, but also in terms of business continuity and risk management. And then you convert that vision to strategy, and we can help you do that. And the third part is program and implement the strategy, which we can also help. So it's not enough that you actually have this moonshot, as you can see there. It's not enough that you have the vision. As what Roland said earlier, it's important to be able to convert this into strategy and into something where you can actually execute it to make a big difference. So thank you very much. You can follow my Twitter account. I share a lot of stuff there in my LinkedIn account. And if you have any questions, just send me an email as well. So that's it.
Thank you, Jose, for illustrating how a combination of corporate innovation and futures thinking is essential in any business looking for long-term resilience. I believe that the audience can agree that nothing is constant in the world, and corporations should always be ready to create change within their framework and prepare for the uncertain future. With that being said, let me now call on both Roland and Jose for the panel discussion. To join this panel, we would like to introduce Grace Reynoso, who is the Managing Director of the Asian Institute of Management School of Executive Education and Lifelong Learning. This discussion will be moderated by Paul Pajo, who is a founding board member, co-founder, and head of digital transformation solutions at Embiggen.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Sam. Miss Grace, maybe you want to say hello to our viewers?
Hello. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here and being invited in your event. So I hope you will be learning more about us in our panel discussions in a bit. Thank you.
Maybe you can share what I always see the SEAL, right? AIM, SEEL.
AIM, yes. Okay, so AIM is Asian Institute of Management. SEAL is School of Executive Education and Lifelong Learning. So we handle all the certificate courses of AIM.
Okay. Yeah, so I heard Professor Jose just started a class.
He did. Yeah,
a few
futures
weeks.
thinking.
Okay. So congrats. Yeah. So maybe Roland can start with this. Maybe he can share the story behind Embiggen Consulting. So for those who are new and they've only heard about this consulting firm via this webinar or via Facebook, Roland, even Prof. Jose, maybe you can share something.
Yeah, actually, it started out when I was doing corporate innovation consulting, and I was with a big conglomerate in the Philippines, and I noticed that one of the reasons why we did not get that account was because of the big three consulting firms, right? And so I won't name these consulting firms anymore, but then what I realized is that their consulting practice is not contextualized or hyper localized to the Philippine context, and this is why I sought the help of Paul, which eventually he led me to Earl and Fam, and because Earl and Fam and Paul obviously are in the startup ecosystem, innovation ecosystem in the Philippines. And it started in a Makati rooftop in last 2018. No? I just got back from the US, from Washington. And Earl, actually, it was his last night here in Manila. He just came here. He's based in the New York area in the US. I caught him right before he left for his early morning flight, and we did agree that there was a big gap in the innovation ecosystem, specifically for corporations, big ones and small ones. And it started there. We all did agree that there's something that needs to be done. And actually, you, Paul, you were the one who came up with the name Embiggen, which means to enlarge, right? And yeah, and that's how it started. So the whole idea of Embiggen Consulting is to not only help the Philippines in corporate innovation, but also we're sure that in emerging markets such as the ASEAN, some parts of Europe, for example, Russia, are all emerging markets, and they would need processes and innovation systems that will really help them innovate, to lift their respective economies and to create new lines of growth for their organizations.
And thanks. Oh, Prof. D, maybe you wanna share a bit how he became involved with Embiggen.
Yeah, you should
You
ask
already have
Roland.
a lucrative, you already have a lucrative career in with him. I heard. So
No, well, for me, my advocacy is really future thinking. As I mentioned, it's not a new field. It's been there for several decades. It's been used in Silicon Valley since what? Since the 1980s, and many of the organizations there have used futures thinking. It's actually embedded in their cultures and the way they do things, but it's not yet here in the Philippines. So that's my advocacy. And I was talking to Roland. Roland actually is part of the Masters of Science in Innovation and Business program, and we had futures thinking as one of the subjects. And I think there really is, I would say, they're really good brothers and sisters, innovation and futures thinking. One feeds off the other, and futures thinking can help spark innovation the same way that innovation can actually push further futures thinking, and create new futures, new possible futures. And he invited me to be part of Embiggen, and yeah, I said yes. And what I like about it is Embiggen is really about helping organizations in emerging countries. The context is very different, even though the tools are there. But the context, the application, the culture, it's a little bit different. The infrastructure, it's a little bit different. So that's why it's important to put it in the correct context.
I wanna, yeah, thanks for that, Prof. Dino. So I wanna circle back to what Roland was saying in the first part of the keynote. He was saying that companies necessarily now have to have like an innovation uh, component. They're having entrepreneurs in residence, uh, in a way to give them some direction for their innovation. At the same time, you do have a digital fellows program, which is, when you think about it, is kind of meta, right? Isn't a company sending uh, their, what they call this, employees, or if someone enrolls in this program, isn't this an exercise in future thinking and strategic foresighting in a way? And having an entrepreneur in residence also an exercise in futures thinking and strategic foresighting, right? Because in a way you're anticipating
Mm.
some innovation. Maybe Grace can comment on that. But it's just a meta thing, right? In other words, you do want innovation and you want strategic foresight and futures thinking. And that's why you want to learn about these things now, right? Because
Yeah.
it's an investment in the future. Maybe Grace can comment because you've seen this happen in your programs. I'm sure this is
Yes.
the ethos also, not only of your program, but the people who enroll in your programs in AIM.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that question. So, educational institutions like AIM provide a platform wherein subject matter experts on futures thinking, the likes of Professor Jose, and then digital leaders are able to work together in sharing insights and best practices to help organizations and businesses build their next generation of digital innovation leaders. So, they mentioned earlier about the partnership between Embiggen and the AIM SEAL. It's really a holistic. So the plan is really to provide a holistic program, a fellowship program at that, on digital transformation and innovation.
Okay.
So if I may give a little bit overview of the program, it's actually a three-phase program. So the first phase is will run in 15 weeks, starting in January 2021. Professor De Colongan mentioned about vision and strategy. So this is where vision and strategy will be discussed for the organization, where participants, through class discussions, workshops, inspirational talks by digital leaders themselves, will be exposed to best practices in digital innovation and transformation. Another phase is the phase two, we call the digital immersion. So it is where the participants' learning will be solidified through immersion in leading innovation of global companies in their ecosystem, just like what Roland mentioned earlier, a possible trip in the Silicon Valley in the US. And then, of course, phase three is the digital capstone. It's where execution of the strategy will take place. So this is very critical. It's where participants will be provided with individual coaching and mentoring sessions on the application of concepts learned throughout the program.
So in a way, what Roland was saying, right? The whole reason Embiggen was created in the first place was there was a need for contextualization for Philippines and emerging economies. So I think this new program by AIM really is targeting that particular need, no? So let's just hope by next year, people can go to the United States, and we already have a vaccine, right? And hopefully, it's more stable than what's happening now. I actually want to ask Prof. Dino, like you mentioned some of the signals, right? And maybe we can contextualize that for the Philippine setting, right? You mentioned like the flooding in China, but I saw a while back there was like a architecture contest, like I think what do you call this, design against the elements, right? And people were actually looking for, I think this was led by Ilyak Diaz, who also leads the Litter of Light, and basically was talking about designs for flooding. Uh, is that something? I think that aligns with your futures thinking and strategic foresight, right? Is it something that can also be a source of ideas, right, and revenue, especially now with all the devastation that's happening? I think much as we need to respond immediately to the need, right, to alleviate the disaster, but I think this is one of the areas in our country that really needs strategic foresight and thinking so that we can be whether we can have a design against the elements, so to speak. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Paul. I mean, just we call some events, for example, like the pandemic. Some people would call this like a black swan event, although I wouldn't really say that. Black swan meaning it's something that happens to you totally unexpected. It catches you flat-footed, and totally you're disrupted. Um, Although some people say, futurists would actually say, no, this is nothing new. We saw this coming. There are academic journals talking about COVID, not necessarily the coronavirus, not exactly COVID-19, but the SARS strain. And learning from that experience, they knew another global pandemic was due. But then there's also that concept of black elephants, meaning it's that elephant in the room. Everyone knows that there's something wrong with it, but nobody wants to acknowledge it. And then something happens, and then you have the blame game. A perfect example for me of a black elephant is, do you know Manila is actually the rate of Manila going down, or you could probably say sea levels going up. The rate of sea levels going up in Manila is 4 times the average in the world. And that's because of a combination of factors. Of course, there's climate change, but it's compounded by how we manage our sewage systems and basically how water is lost in the soil. So we're actually going down much faster. And it's not an issue now, but in 30 to 40 years, it's going to be a big issue. So if you're talking about, how do we actually deal with that, whether it's a society or even as organizations, that's something that we should start looking at now, because you're looking at Metro Manila. It's the center of of commerce. It's where a lot of capital is and infrastructure is, and so much people, millions of people in there. 15, what they say it's 10 million, and then if it's a working day, it's 20 million. I don't know, but this was several years ago. uh, there's so much opportunities. I mean, if you look at many of the issues, many of the problems, why don't, I mean, if you look at it in terms of scenario building now, and I posted this in my Instagram the other day, how would the world look like if we can imagine it where, even if with the strongest typhoons, our families, our farms, our homes are not, even our offices are not damaged at all. And in fact, we actually profit out of it, or we become stronger out of it. If you relate it to, let's say, biomimicry, where, systems, like many of the, I would say many of the systems actually embrace a lot of water, and they become stronger because of this, because it feeds into, it helps to contain the nutrients and so on. So and there are water basins that actually make sure it doesn't evaporate, it doesn't get displaced or wasted. um, so so futures thinking actually helps us to identify those scenarios, but then again, it has to feed into a very strong strategic planning, strategic management process. And that's where I think, this relationship with AIN and Embiggen, where you have both practitioners, but you also have it's rooted in, I would say, practical theory, in pragmatic theory, and the experience of different professionals in different fields. I think that helps to paint a really good picture, not just of the future, but what do you do once you've painted that picture, and and translating that into a strong execution. So,
Mhm.
so I hope I answered your question, Paul. I went
Yes,
off a little.
I like the way
Yeah.
your framework frames everything in terms of opportunity. No, kasi for most of the most part, when you look at, like, I was surprised on the way you pictured the Chinese flooding in your presentation, and the next word that comes from you is opportunity. Normally, people revel in catastrophic thinking, no? So, but that's why I'd like Grace and Roland to comment also from perspective of the AIM community. I'm sure they're going to listen to this. They're going to hear about this program. I think this is a very good opportunity for them to see all this otherwise is framed from a catastrophic perspective into
Yeah.
something that's actually something that's full of opportunity. I remember the quote of Peter Chell. I don't know exact quote, no, but he said, uh, "We have all these billions of dollars expecting flying cars, and what we got is a social network." When you think about it, yo, parang, all the billions of dollars in this world are, di ba, when you think about it, the FAANG, right? Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix,
Alma.
and Google of this world are basically search engines, watching movies, and social network, di ba? Parang,
Yeah.
so so maybe you can comment what do you think, Roland, would be the opportunity, you being as a future alumni, and Miss Grace, no, knowing you're actually behind the scenes and actually creating this program. How exciting would this be for not only the future alumni of AIM, but even the current
Mhm.
alumni of AIM to participate in this kind of framework?
Mhm. Roland, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So, Paul, it's really it's really a must-have right now. That learning, that future thinking capability and competence in the leaders. Adopting digital is more than an afterthought right now in business. with all the disruptions and uncertainties. A lot of uncertainties happening right now, and the calamities also around us. Businesses need to transform and adopt digital to stay competitive and survive at this time. It's crucial for companies to begin and progress their transition to digital transformation. And with the help of Embiggen and AIM, we are able to enable transformation to happen and have a maximum impact in one's organizations. Because I believe that transformation must be weaved into the very fabric of the company, and this is possible only if the leaders will be championing it within the organization. So so we want to invite everyone to attend our program in January. The first cohort will start in January, and info sessions are scheduled this month and next month. So we will be probably inviting everyone to the info sessions just so they're able to learn more about the program.
Roland, you wanna comment as a future AIM
Alumni.
alumni?
Yeah, actually, I can envision that the future, well, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, the people who actually graduated from this fellowship program will be the next CIOs, right, or chief innovation officers, the next CDOs or chief digital officers, right, or even perhaps we can see from this cohort, if it happens, national CIO, right, an innovation officer that is directly in the cabinet of the president, deeply ingrained in the government structure. That is a person specifically in charge of digital transformation and innovation for the whole country, which is what Singapore is actually doing. They want to do a smart nation. No? So I'm really excited to see the types of people that will come out, the types of people that will enroll, right? Their visions and aspirations, how they can help their organizations, their companies, applying different, innovation strategies, having perhaps, hopefully, a specific foresight, corporate foresight unit that will be trained by Professor Jose, right? That will come out from this program. So more than anything else, it's really the community and the types of innovations, the types of progress that we can create because of Embiggen and AIM.
Yes, I actually tweeted Ilyak. I told him why doesn't he open source the winning entries for the design against the elements? So since this is Philippine Startup Weekend, I want to circle back to the theme, right? Meaning, sure, you're talking about C-suite individual, CIO, uh, CDO, Chief Digital Officer. But when I was attending the MicroStrategy is like the only, like they're the biggest independent business intelligence company in the world, right? And Michael Saylor keeps talking about the virtual wave. So what's happening is, if you notice, this webinar, this seminar, these workshops are all happening now virtually, and that's what happened. They basically abandoned all their conferences. So something happened that's happening at scale. So all the knowledge and the programs that used to be need a face-to-face interface, it's everything virtual. In fact, I'm so happy that Amy is doing this, and this is an online delivery, and that means the accessibility now of the intervention, so to speak, is now available to anyone who has a good internet connection, and of course a minimal uh, matriculation fee, right? So, this wasn't possible maybe a few months ago, right? Uh, probably a lot of people would still insist on face to face, but now I heard that the phrase for the first time. It's called the virtual wave. So that means this is happening at scale, right? So what I think, other than what having a chief innovation officer in companies, I think we will see a new wave of startups that are. I think that's the ending of Professor Jose's presentation, right? At the end, there will be products there will be companies, there will be startups that will be created and looking at all these problems as opportunities.
Mhm.
So hopefully, I remember looking at talking to Doy Vey of Smart. Remember when they started Smart? They were a small company in a small office, and I kept thinking, what is the next? When you meet those people, right? Parang, I wonder what's the next Smart. Because when they started, they had a lot of competitors,
Yeah.
Extelcom, and they basically outsmarted and survived everyone, and they ended up with
Yeah.
Global Smart, right? So the question now is, there might what kind of startups will happen when this kind of people enroll in the AIM seal, right? Maybe we'll have new architectural companies building, as Prof. D is saying, flood-proof uh, houses. Uh, maybe when we when we hear of typhoons, we will now be wearing scuba neoprene, and everyone is required to have scuba. I don't know, like I'm sure
Yeah.
there are crazy startups that will come out, no, from this program. So I'm just very very hopeful. Right. So anyone want to comment on that? Maybe you've seen this in your signals database, Prof. D. What could happen?
Yeah. Uh, the role of futurists is not really to predict the future. I can't tell you whether people will be swimming, will be walking in our scuba gear, But there are fashion designers. If you look at fashion, there's a lot of new trends that are coming
Yeah.
out,
Mm.
or a revisit of the old. And I would also say, watch out for opportunities for, like, if you look at it just in terms of technologies, opportunities in terms of how these technologies converge. If you combine, let's say, brain machine interfaces with artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
with robotics, with these new materials powered by graphene, for example,
Hmm.
just those five alone. Okay, let's include sensors, internet of humans and all that. Think of the kind of futures that can potentially happen, but also think of the kind of opportunities that you might have that's focused on, again, not forgetting humans, like putting still human needs, I would say Filipino needs at the center. Like, that's an area that's a fantastic, exciting area in terms of startups, and even for corporate innovation. Innovation within existing corporations, existing organizations. And I think another area would be, look at how there's a crossover in the industries that's happening. Like, you have the health industry, and look at how it's being connected now with tech, for example. If you look at health and real estate, you get to see now hospitals actually investing in real estate. And because for them, they're redefining the whole concept of wellness, saying it's not just about taking care of it when you're sick, but really building this whole environment that will take care of you, right? Or you have other FMCGs going into health, or going into environmental health. So you have, I can take forever, but you
Yeah.
have a lot of these convergent industries as well, and it's looking at how they could meet, let's say, number one, new or emerging needs, but also existing needs that have sort of changed. If you've read or watched Social Dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Whole, I would say, controversy issues related to extraction of data, etc. What's stopping, organizations? And we've seen this with the founder of one of the founders of the internet. He created MeWe, which is another social platform that says, we
Yeah.
won't extract your data, and you own your data, right? But there are other ways that you could actually protect the privacy of people. And there are a lot of startups that's actually just working on that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but they have to take the course to be able to, to hear
Yeah.
what these other opportunities are. Yeah.
Yeah. So all these things, no, at the end, someone has to take a risk, right? Someone has to be an entrepreneur, right? So,
Mhm.
uh, like Roland was saying about the entrepreneur in residence, and I think in a way, Grace, what AIM did here is very entrepreneurial, right? You're uh, basically taking a risk, right, by saying this is a new program and we think this is something that people need at the same at this time, right? So maybe you
Mhm.
can share with us this kind of the thinking behind this, the entrepreneurial thinking behind this that made AIM decide to come up with this digital fellow program. Maybe like parang like the BTS, the behind
Mhm.
the scenes.
Behind the scenes. Well, actually, it was a decision made by their school head, Professor Albert Mateo. He saw this opportunity to really partner with Embiggen. It all started with, I think, also our president, Jikyong Kang, who knew about Earl and his vision and all his advocacies and all his achievements and all. And then Jikyong sort of mandated us to get in touch with him, Earl, and then it started from there. So discussions about the possible program happened. We had several meetings online, late at night, because of course Earl is in the US. So those discussions enabled us to have this particular program, and we're in the midst of setting up through the info sessions, marketing happening, and then of course the first rollout is in January.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
anyway, this is
can I
like
comment
a
as well
go ahead. Yeah. So this is like a startup happening uh, to
within the
service
school?
other
Yeah.
startups. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Roland, you wanna comment?
Yeah, actually, one of the reasons why I enrolled in AIM to begin with was I've seen that number one, it's the it's perhaps the best management school in the Philippines, right? Or is the best management school in the Philippines. But secondly, I noticed that they adapt really well to the times. Right? So, for example, they just created a PhD in data science, right?
Yeah.
And they know that data is the new oil. They created my program, which is the innovation in business, where Professor Jose is teaching. Right? And they also did another AIM SEAL program is in data privacy with Smart. Right?
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think this is the second partnership this year, or perhaps with an external institution, right? That I would not think of, graduate school that would actually do that, right? Ateneo doesn't have it. Sorry, if I name drop, right? And another, business school in the Philippines doesn't do that, right? But international business schools such as AIM, they do
Hmm.
that, right? Stanford does
Hmm.
that, NUS does that. Harvard has all of these industry partnerships and co-creating programs that are very resilient, are very adaptive to the times, because it's after the program, it's really the industry that will really sort of you know benefit from the graduates of the program, right? So I think this very entrepreneurial. You're correct, Paul. No, AIM is very entrepreneurial. They practice what they preach. No, they are a business school, and they also are experimenting on different products and services. And actually, I heard that they're creating an adaptive classroom, and perhaps that might be something that, hopefully, the perhaps the second cohort of AIM, this program will be able to experience, just like Harvard Business School's adaptive classroom and their new technology in virtual learning. No? But yeah, so AIM is very entrepreneurial, and I think this particular program is very innovative, and we're really glad to partner with AIM
Hmm.
SEAL for the Digital Transformation Fellows program.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yes.
just like everything, all good things must come to an end. So maybe I like a few words from Miss Grace and Prof D before we go. Before I turn this back to Sam, we have a few
Okay.
minutes, maybe a minute
Few
on
Okay.
seconds.
invitation.
So So this is opportunity. We AIM is also very open to all the opportunities. One of the things that we do right now is to forge partnerships with institutions and organizations with expertise and different knowledge and subject matters. This is one way for us to stay relevant as well in this very uncertain times. So we are very, very happy and we are very excited to share with you a learning journey that is worth investing in. So come and join us in the Digital Fellowship Program of AIM and Embiggen Consulting. Again, we're starting in January, and we hope to invite you in our succeeding info sessions just so you'll be able to learn more about our program. So we hope to see you then.
Thanks, Miss Grace. Prof. D?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. For me, futures thinking is really a competency that a leader of today needs. It's not really, it's a question, it's not an option, but it's really an integral part of being able to navigate this world. And this program, this digital transformation program, it will give you the fish in a way, but it also teach you how to fish. I would say equip you with tools, approaches, mental models that no matter what changes may happen, because technology is technology, right? And there will always be disruptions that may happen. But how do you deal with this? How do you adapt? How do you make sure that your company not only survives but thrives in such kinds of environment? That's the kind of leaders that we are building, that we are developing.
Yeah.
Roland, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah. So thanks for this opportunity for attending our panel session. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Paul. And I do hope that through innovation we survive and create new lines of revenue and growth post pandemic. So we can give it back to Sam.
Yeah, yes, thanks for the panel. Again, I want to reiterate what Ms. Grace was saying. If you are part of the industry, do contact AIM. They are more than willing partners to have industry partners. In that way, we all of us stay relevant, right? And we're able to institutionalize this kind of thinking, not only within companies, but we're able also to co-create new companies, new startups that moves us away from catastrophic thinking, but look at these things happening to us as something that is an opportunity and where we can make a lot of money also, right? And on that note, di ba, ang gandang note, di ba? Always, and a good note, right? And on that note, I invite back Sam. Come on back, Sam.
Closing our panel discussion, we would like to thank Roland, Jose, Grace, and Paul for sharing their knowledge and expertise on digital transformation and corporate innovation. I believe that our audience has gained a lot of new insights and perspectives on how to build, design, and innovate their businesses. Although our session is now coming to a close, we hope that it has broadened the horizon of our audience, imparting innovative and transformational perspectives. To formally end our session for this evening, the Philippine Startup Week, in partnership with Embiggen Consulting, would like to thank everyone who has joined today's event. We would also like to extend our gratitude again to our speakers for taking the time to share their expertise with us. If you are eager to learn more about digital transformation and corporate innovation, or even the Digital Transformation Fellows Executive Program, then feel free to follow and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Embiggen Consulting for more content. Once again, we are Embiggen Consulting, an international innovation and strategy consulting firm, committed to empower forward-thinking organizations to navigate disruptive change. Thank you for attending today's event, and we look forward to seeing your ideas come into life. I am Samantha Guevara, your host for tonight. Have a great night, everyone.